This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the science podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Ganya.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. It is that time in our season again where we have reached our best of episodes. For this best of, we are taken to the air. This is going to be fun.
Yes, we are. So what are we going to be learning about in this episode?
The best of flying creatures.
The best of flying creatures. Ooh, this is going to be exciting. So for this one, we're going back to episode 106. How do we know that dinosaurs could fly? With
Yes.
Dr. Jingmai O'Connor. We have episode 205, How Do Birds Fly? With Alex Troutman. And episode 223, How Do You Rehabilitate a Bald Eagle? With Marge Gibson. I'm sensing a theme here, Jeff, right? Flying birds all over the place.
Absolutely. Lots of flying birds, and who doesn't love learning more about them?
Yep, so we hope you enjoy these clips. Take a listen.
How do we know dinosaurs could fly?
How do we know that dinosaurs could fly? Ooh, I think I'm going to learn a lot in this episode too. Who's our guest today, Jeff?
Our guest today is the wonderful Dr. Jingmai O'Connor. She is Associate Curator of Fossil Reptiles at the Field Museum in Chicago.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Jingmai.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be chatting with you today.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. And can I just say, the Field Museum was one of my favorite places in the whole world. So I'm really excited that you're here. But let's start talking about dinosaurs. Can I ask, how did you get into it? Were you one of those kids that loved dinosaurs, from birth, basically?
Actually, I am not. I am like the one paleontologist. I know. Every other paleontologist has these like really cute pictures of them when they're like 3 to 5 years old, holding little dinosaur toys.
Okay.
And they're like, this is me. I always knew I wanted to be a paleontologist. And I'm like, I have pictures of me playing witch quite extensively. And I was like, when all my other colleagues knew they wanted to be paleontologists, I wanted to put spells on people and be a witch.
I love it.
Yeah. So I discovered paleontology quite late in life, like when I was around 18 years old in college. But I fell in love with the idea of evolution, like how animals change through time, how life has gone from a single cellular organism to like the incredible diversity of animals that we see alive on our planet today. Like that process just blows my mind. It fascinates me. Yeah, so then I decided, I was already a geologist, a geology major, and if you want to study evolution through geology, you become a paleontologist.
Okay, so it didn't happen right away with those 3 to 5 year old, here's me and my dinosaur toys, but it did sort of happen naturally from geology to paleontology. So that leads me to, what made you choose geology in terms of your major at first?
Well, in that case, I was inspired by my mom. I know that's like so cliche, but my mom is
awesome.
Yeah, right? I mean, my mom is just one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. She's so hardworking. She's so smart. She's funny. She's just charismatic, like just a really wonderful woman. And she did her PhD when I was a kid, so I saw her doing it. Yeah, I got to go out with her collecting rocks and minerals and sometimes fossils while she was doing her degree.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then I decided to follow in her path, but I really didn't know what my interest was within this broad field of geology. Like, what did I want to do as a geologist? I really had no clue until I met a paleontologist named Don Prothero, who's like the fossil rhino expert of the world. And I mean, I have no interest in rhinos. I mean, they're cool too, sure. But, you know, he's got that area covered, I would say. But yeah, he really, you know, his passion for paleontology was, I guess you could say, infectious. And now I'm fully infected.
That's wonderful.
That's wonderful. So can you kind of explain to our listeners what the connection is between geology and paleontology and how one leads to the other?
Cool. Yeah, sure. So geology is the study of Earth, like all the rocks that make up Earth, how they formed, the processes that shape our continents. But in these rocks, you sometimes have the remains of once living animals or organisms trapped within the layers of rock. And we call these things fossils. So like geologists would find these and sometimes use them in order to determine how old the rocks were. And they also started to notice how life would be changing as, you know, you go from rocks from one age to another. And so that became the field of paleontology, which basically means the study of ancient life.
Which is so cool. I'm like following all this going, yes, this sounds so amazing.
It really is.
We are definitely science geeks. And yes, dinosaurs are definitely one of those high excitement type topics. With paleontology, when you start to study it, do you know, like you just mentioned, the doctor that sort of had the rhinos covered, do you pick certain species that you want to study? Do you pick a certain time and era? How does that happen?
So if you loved paleontology since you were a little kid, then maybe there's one group of animals that you've always loved more than others and you've always wanted to work on. So that is definitely the case with some people. But for me, you know, I just really liked just the idea of evolution. So I wasn't really attached to any one group of organisms. So I always jokingly say that I am an equal opportunity extinct organism enthusiast. I love all fossils.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
So
that should be a group.
I know, right? And I have to see what the acronym is if it sounds cool. Yeah, so when I applied to go to do my PhD, I applied to work with lots of different people who work on very different things. So I applied to work with one guy who studies fossil echinoderms, things like crinoids or starfish. Yeah, I also applied to work with a lady who studies fossil poop, which we call coprolites.
Yes.
Okay.
Kind of funny.
Yes.
And then I also applied to work with a guy who works on marine reptiles like mosasaurs, plesiosaurs. Extinct reptiles that get grouped with dinosaurs, but they're not dinosaurs. No dinosaur has ever become fully aquatic, meaning living in that water all the time. So if you see a fossil reptile living in the water all the time, like an ichthyosaur, looks very fish-like, it's definitely not a dinosaur. And that's actually my favorite group of animals. Like I love plesiosaurs, those really long-necked animals with flippers in the water that are so weird. We actually don't really know where they fit in the reptile tree. But then I ended up making the practical decision to work with a curator named Dr. Luis Chiappe at the LA Natural History Museum. And he told me if I worked with him, I would work on Mesozoic birds. So the earliest fossil birds that we know of and how these animals evolved from dinosaurs and how they evolved to then also look like the birds we see alive today. So I thought, you know, this is an area of research where there was lots of new fossils being found. So I said, you know, being a paleontologist is really tough. It's very competitive. So I said, I'm going to work in an area where there's lots of new fossils because it means I'll have a good chance of being a successful paleontologist and one day getting to work in an amazing place like the Field Museum. And it worked out.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Nicely done.
Yeah. The question is how do you know that dinosaurs flew, basically? So can you tell us a little about the evolution of the research that you discovered and how you kind of looked at fossils throughout the years? Because that to me is also so fascinating.
Yeah, well, okay. So while the time I've been a paleontologist, we've had a drastic change in our way of thinking about the evolution of flight in dinosaurs. Huge, massive change, like really exciting. And that's one thing I love about paleontology is you can discover one new fossil and everything you think you knew just changes. So you really need to be willing to say that you were wrong if you're going to be a paleontologist. And scientists in general, there's no shame in that. So when I first started, studying paleontology, we thought that the only flying dinosaurs were birds. So if you wanted to understand how birds evolved from dinosaurs, you could ask the question, how did flight evolve in dinosaurs? Because that's how birds, flying dinosaurs evolved. And then while I was still in college, a really cool dinosaur named Microraptor was discovered. And Microraptor is a tiny relative of something like Velociraptor. So it's a member of a group of dinosaurs called the Dromaeosauridae. So also includes like Dromaeosaurus and Deinonychus, dinosaurs some people are pretty familiar with.
Okay.
But this tiny relative of Velociraptor had feathers, long feathers on its arms and on its legs. And these long feathers formed a wing-like surface. So it looks like this dinosaur has wings on its arms and its legs. But the thing is, we'd actually found dinosaurs with wings that were not flying because their wings were actually kind of small. So we actually know, so in dinosaurs, wings evolved first for something else, something we're not quite sure about, maybe for like display. Look at me, I'm very pretty, attracting mates.
Yeah, sure.
But the feathers in the wings on the arms and the legs of Microraptor showed something really special. The feathers were asymmetrical. So what this means is when you look at a bird feather, it has that like central spine, that radius, right?
Yes.
And then it has vein coming off either side. And sometimes you'll find a feather where one vein is much narrower than the other vein. And so these are feathers you only find in the wing. And you only find them in the wing of birds that fly, because some birds have lost their flight, right? Like an ostrich. So this asymmetry of feathers is something that's linked to flight. And we found it in the wings of Microraptor, on the arms and the legs. So this revealed a dinosaur that seems to be flying with 4 wings.
How do birds fly?
How do birds fly? I mean, a simple question, but there's a lot more to this than we think. And who is the guest today that's going to explain all this, Jeff?
Our guest today has all the information and in a super informative way.
Yes.
Today we have Alex Troutman, wildlife biologist and science communicator.
Welcome to the show, Alex.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for having me.
We are so thrilled to have you, and we're going to get to talk to you about what Jeff said, like birds, which are everywhere and really cool to watch. Like I've discovered them kind of in the last couple of years. So what I'm wondering is, were you one of those kids that always like watched birds?
Yes, I always watch birds. To get started, like I would be fishing with my dad and brothers and uncles. And I would actually be more interested in the birds that was fishing alongside me, like great blue herons. They would outfish me. But my favorite bird that I loved to see at that time was the red-tailed hawk. And I would see it flying, and I got to see the glow of the sun like shining through the red tail. And yeah, and that now is my spark bird. But at the time, I didn't know what a spark bird was. But that was the bird that got me interested into nature and wanting to learn more about birds.
Oh, that's so cool.
Hawk.
Okay. And I just learned right now what a spark bird is.
Yeah.
I did not know that's what that was. So now we all know. That's super cool. And I want to ask, did you ever see a bird, like as you were out there fishing, did you see birds actually nabbing fish while you were watching?
Oh, yes. The great blue heron, it's a wading bird, and it was taking fish like almost right beside me, like it was laughing at me too. It would get a fish and like, ha, I got another one. You have nothing.
Well, I have to say, I used to go fishing with my family when I was a kid, and I'm the only girl, and so all my brothers love fishing, and I would read instead of fishing because I'm just not a big fisher person, right? And so that would have been nice I would have watched the birds, right? Instead of reading, because that would have been science. But so I'm curious, how did you take your loves of bird watching as a kid kind of into what you do today?
Yeah, so for me, it became a roundabout way. I was really interested in animals for a while, but
Okay.
I really didn't see anyone who looks like me working with animals besides being a vet or a farmer. So I thought it would be a vet. And I went to school to be a vet. And then I decided to change my major because being a vet, it takes a strong brain and a lot of mental skills that I didn't want to go through. So I, so I switched,
Understand?
yeah, so I switched my major to middle grades education and my minor in biology. And during that time, I went outside for one of my classes. It was a field biology class, which basically means we go outside and do field work. And it was ornithology, which is the study of birds.
Oh,
okay.
So, yeah.
And you were hooked then, right?
I was, yes. I got to go birding twice a week because we had a lab one day a week.
Wow.
But twice a week, we got to go to different birding spots around our town and in my college. And I got to see my favorite duck, the wood duck, which is beautiful. It has like a mohawk and it has like green and red feathers. The males do. And that's my favorite bug. And that's what really got me back into like birding. And then I was like, I could be outside studying animals, especially birds, and get paid to do it. Like, this is what I'm going to do. Right,
yeah, that's a dream job.
Yes, exactly. That's how it was. So I switched my major back literally like the next week. And I was like, I'm going back to biology.
That's fantastic.
Okay. I like that. So I have never been a birder. I, like Jen, like watching the birds just sort of randomly. How do you pick a birding spot? You just mentioned that as college.
Question.
Like, is that just somebody that knows more about birds in your area, knows the best places to go? Or how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's a mix of everything. So there are different apps that tell you like birding hotspots where some cool birds are going to be at. So you can go follow those apps. Or for me, I go to my favorite like hiking spots. And I know I'm guaranteed to see some birds there. So I go there and I see the birds that I'm interested in, and then if I want to see something cool or new, I'll look up the app and say, okay, there's a white-throated sparrow at this place. I'll go find that white-throated sparrow. But many times, I'm just going birding to parks that I'm used to in my yard. There's not really set like plans to say, hey, I'm going to go here every time look for a bird. But it's really, for me, it's really just about being outside, and while I'm outside, I do a lot of birding.
But it seems like you've taken it a little further because we're kind of talking about how do birds fly. So what have you learned about that by doing all this research on all the birds?
Yeah, I learned birds fly, and it's very fascinating. For me, I look at the way that they are shaped. So if you look at birds, you notice some things about them. They don't have teeth like us.
All right.
So that's one thing. So having teeth, that means you're lighter. But also something you can't really see is their bones are like modified hollow, so they don't have like the dense bone marrow that we have. So that's also a form of weight reduction. If you look at them, they have feathers. We don't have feathers, so that's another thing that aid them in flying is their feathers. And then there are other organs that are reduced that allow them to fly as well. And then looking at birds, like a lot of them, they have strong like chest muscles that allows them to flap. Those are some big reasons that birds are able to fly is their weight reduction. So the lack of teeth, the hollow bones, and also like they gave up some of their organs that allow for like extra waste to come out. So they have they have a lot of weight reduction, and then the feathers that catches air and helps them to fly as well. And then to go from there, when you notice when you're looking at a bird, like the smaller birds, they can just take off with their feet. But other birds that are a little bit thicker, like geese, they actually get like a somewhat running start, flapping their wings, kind of like an airplane, to get up in the air to achieve that lift. So when birds are getting in the air, that's called lift. So they're using their feathers, they're flapping their wings, and then running to get kind of get a takeoff like an airplane.
Well, and they kind of put their necks out too, don't they? To kind of help them. Yeah, I've noticed that. We have lots of geese here in Florida. And they stretch their necks out?
Right, yeah, they stretch their necks out. And then also another way, if you looking at like birds, like their head is not really like super round like ours, and their body isn't blocky. They're more like streamlined, or like they're more aerodynamic, so they can cut through the air. Where if there was more blocky, they would not be able to cut through the air. It would kind of like hold the air or block the air. Right. So the air can move around them because they're more streamlined, aerodynamic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So with all different types of birds, from the small to the big, all of their wings are just a little bit differently shaped.
Yeah.
Is that based on the fact that that's how they've evolved, based on how big they are, how heavy they are, so that species of bird can fly?
Yeah, so it's based on how big they are, and also like areas they live in, and what their prey item is, or how the mode of flight they are. So hummingbirds, they're not going to have giant wings to flap. They have to flap their wings like so many like 1,000 beats per second. So obviously they're not going to have big wings like hogs. And then also like soaring birds are not going to have small wings. They won't be able to soar. So their wing shape is based on what their movement is, and also what food that they will be eating.
How do you rehabilitate a bald eagle?
Ooh, how do you rehabilitate bald eagles? You know, they are some of the coolest birds, I think. So I can't wait to hear about our special guest and how she does this. So who is our guest, Jeff?
Our guest today is the terrific Marge Gibson. She is founder and executive director of the Raptor Education Group.
Welcome to the show, Marge.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here and share my passion.
Oh, well, we can't wait to hear all about this. And so I'm wondering, since you've been working with raptors for many, many years, as a kid, did you always like birds?
You know, it was my first word, birdie.
Oh my gosh.
And so I really didn't have a choice. I just, I was born this way.
Okay.
So what did you do as a kid with the birds? I mean, how was that your first word? Did you see them? Your parents talk to you about them?
You know, my parents were very natural oriented, and I was the youngest. I was born kind of late in their life, but they really liked everything. But birds had a real fondness with them. But when I was really little, my parents have some interesting stories that I would be, now I don't remember some of this, but apparently we had a field across the street, and I would hear the killdeers, which would call at night when they called to locate their youngsters. And one night it was raining really hard, and I was 3, and I got out of my bed and I went downstairs. I went out the door and I went into the field to help, because I thought he needed my help because he was crying, the killdeer. So when they woke up, I wasn't in the bed.
Oh my gosh.
I got stuck in the mud in the field, and they were hysterical. And
you're just trying to help the bird.
I was. And so I didn't want to leave the field either, even when they found me, because I was still convinced that it needed my help.
Oh my gosh.
So their life was challenging when I was a child.
Sounds like it. But I guess you're right when you say you were born to it. Wow, that's amazing.
Very much. Yeah, it's really interesting. My brother and my sister, had the typical cats and rabbits and that sort of thing. And my dad worked for the DNR. So occasionally he would have, a fox or something like that, that during those years that they would bring home. But for me, it was all about birds. And it was something about, I would see them and just, I just felt like I knew them. I knew everything about them. And so it was just instinctive.
Wow.
Did you ever have any birds as pets?
I had parakeets, yes. I got my first parakeet when I was 5 for my 5th birthday. and, they're fascinating and they can learn to talk. And so, he was a great pet. But it was the wild ones that, when the swallows were nesting, for instance, I liked to watch them, feed the babies.
Okay.
Not, in hand, but, watch the process.
Right.
And, robins, when they nested, and my grandmother had chickens. So chickens were also one of my favorites. And pretty much anything in feathers was, was fascinating to me. And became really, I just wanted to be around them a lot.
Well, that's fantastic. I remember as a kid, and that was a long time ago, that one time on our porch, I grew up in central Illinois, we had a robin's nest. And I remember we'd stay inside, we wouldn't bother, but you could see it and you could see the eggs and you could watch. And I still remember that. My mom she was very much an outside person too. We were outside all the time. It was amazing. So you took that love of birds. Did you go to college and train with birds, or what did you do?
Well, the interesting thing is that when I was 8, I was coming home from school and I was really a quiet kid. I was one of these nerdy little kids that, didn't get along with many people. I mean, I identified avian. Come on.
That was me.
They were like, whoa. So I was on my way home from school. I was about a block and a half from walking home. And we had a big storm. And the storm brought down a branch. And there was a Baltimore Orioles nest in it. And I saw these 2 boys that I know that were on bikes, and they had stopped their bikes and laid their bikes down, and they were doing something. And so, I came upon them, and they were doing bad things to the baby birds that were in the nest. They found the nest, and then the babies were only like 2 days old. They were teeny little things. And it was probably the first time I ever stood up for myself or anything else. And they were a little older than me, and kind of, the kids that would tease, at school, that sort of thing.
Sure.
So I grabbed the babies, and I pushed one guy down off the bike.
Wow.
Little kid. And I was 8, and I ran like the wind home and got in my garage and ran in the house and holding these little ones. And my dad saw me running and came out. And then he went to talk to the boys. But meanwhile, I had these little, basically one that lived. It was a little Baltimore Oriole in my hand. So my parents, they didn't have wildlife rehabilitation in those days, of course. This was 7 years ago. So, we had a gas stove. My mother, we knew we had to keep it warm. We put it in a little strawberry box on the pilot light.
Oh, wow.
And then made a concoction of, smashed insects and some egg yolk. I mean, they really stuck to the, the idea of having the correct proteins and things for an insectivore baby. And we fed it, and it turned out to be a male Baltimore Oriole. And we released him. He learned to chirp with my parakeet.
Oh my gosh.
But he returned. I was in college, and my parents would send pictures every year when he would come back, because he would come back to sit on the part of the garage roof. And then he would have babies, and every year, they mate for life. So, unless something happened. So every year we knew when they were getting ready to leave for migration, because they would come back, and all the little kids would be in the lilac bush, and he would sing and sing and sing. And the next day they would be gone.
Oh my gosh.
And so, they would, my parents, we had the Super 8 video, at that time, and they would take video and send them to me at college. And, of course, I named him Angel because, I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And he was very special. And he was the first bird that I, basically rehabilitated.
Wow.
And then with my dad, doing the work he did, if something was found that, that needed help, he would bring it home. And I think it was probably that way before I was born too, with other animals,
Wow.
Right.
But then it kind of got focused on birds when I arrived. And because I think the force was strong within this one.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So you just mentioned this is before bird and wildlife rehabilitation. Can you give us a quick idea on
sort of when that really became a thing where we really started helping to rehabilitate wildlife?
Actually, it became a federal situation. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of Interior is the head of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which protects birds. And to care for them or to have them, in your possession, so to speak, whether it's hunted birds and, you have to have a license to hunt them, or any wild bird you're not supposed to have in your possession. And they developed finally a permit so people could take care of them. But that wasn't really developed or really used until the 1970s. So it was a long time. And so what happened was, members of the public would find, a little robin that needed help, and, they would, it was that little lady in tennis shoes down the road who took care of things,
Yes.
And, but that's the way it was because there was no formal way to do it. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service started doing the permit process, and they called it wildlife rehabilitation.
Wow.
And it is very regulated still. And the states are also involved with it, but regulated so the birds they can't be pets. And, you can't raise them imprinted. You can't sell them. You can't trade them. If you raise them, they have to be released to the wild. And, that doesn't always work out as well if someone raises them and, I think sometimes they get lost in the process. But legally, you have to have a permit, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the state that you live in, to be able to care for wildlife and to rehabilitate it and get it back out into the wild.
So we have taken to the air. I really hope you enjoyed all of those clips. Don't forget, you can now go back to episode 106, episode 205, and episode 223 to hear the entire episodes with all three wonderful guests.
Yes, and you can find them all on our website, solveitforkids.com, or Spotify, or iTunes, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you're looking for another podcast to check out over the holidays, try By Kids for Kids Storytime, which is a storytime podcast for kids with a twist. Every story is performed entirely by a cast of kids from around the world, ages 3 to 13. Our tales are thrilling, exciting, and a healthy dose of sensible values, bringing kids a delightful mix of entertainment and life lessons. And each episode is packed with music and sound effects, which sounds really cool. So this is perfect for storytime, road trips, or anytime fun. So go ahead and check out By Kids for Kids Storytime.
We hope you enjoy the By Kids for Kids Storytime podcast over the holidays as well. Until next time, you'll hear Jen and Jeff on the Science Podcast for kids and families.
Solve it for kids.
kids.